I was 14 years old. My father was in a small Schindler's company. He was saved there. So I went to the Swedish embassy. I was 14. And you just gave the names and they gave you the passport. No other requirement. I'm sorry, so there was no other requirement. You just gave the names and they gave you the passports. That was in October. At that time, the ghetto was already established and Jews were taken to the ghetto. Until then, we lived in so-called Jewish houses, which were scattered around the city because the Nazis thought that this would prevent the bombardment of Budapest because the Allies would spare the Jewish lives. But that wasn't the case anyway.
What is your name?
Gabriel Grossman.
Grossman.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I'm going to be writing a second edition of my book, and one of the joys I have in speaking to groups is to meet people like you. I can do it. I can remember what I said. One of the joys that I have in speaking to groups like this, your first name is Gabriel?
Yes.
Gabriel Rossman, is to find human beings who will augment my witness list in my next edition of the book. So if you would be kind enough to consider staying after. Let him finish. No, let him finish, please. Esty.
Yep.
He has something valuable to say. He is a witness.
Yeah, actually I haven't finished. So at that time, Budapest was already surrounded by the Red Army, so there was no possibility of deportation. And the Germans weren't the kind of people who would just randomly kill. That wasn't their method, but the Hungarian Nazis did it. So it was very dangerous to walk on the street, and it was quite a danger to go into the ghetto, and then you couldn't go out. So that is when we went to the Swedish house. All these houses were about a block from the Danube, about 10-15.
Did you have a chance to meet or see Wallenberg in action?
I only saw him for a second when I was there for the passport.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was very informative. I just wanted to add a little more to it. When the Wallenberg were selling Swedish barbarians to the Allied and the Axis, because the way that they were maintaining the Swedish neutrality to keep it from being occupied was that they were doing business with both sides, because it was a very big country and they didn't have enough people to defend it. So I just want to say that on behalf of the Wallenberg family, so that everybody doesn't think that they were out and out horrible, which, I don't know, that's part of the war. And the other thing is...
May I simply intervene by saying they were not only horrible, but evil. Let me finish. I was at the University of Pennsylvania, law professor. I met that man. I met that Wallenberg. I said, I want to talk to you about your nephew, Raoul. He said, not here. It's a luncheon for the Estee Lauder Institute for International Business. I said, when can we meet? He said, tomorrow morning, come by the Hilton Hotel here in Philadelphia. I'll treat you to breakfast. I said, what time? He said, would 8:30 suit you? I said, yes, indeed. I arrived at 8:15. That gentleman had checked out of the hotel at 7 a.m. So please, don't rewrite history about neutrality.
Okay. And when the Russians entered Budapest, they went in a house-to-house search and they took all the diplomats. So they didn't just take Raoul Wallenberg, they took all the diplomats into Soviet custody.
But he's the only one they kept.
He was never released.
He released Lars Berg, they released Per Unger, so...
Yes, they released the others, but they did not release Raoul Wallenberg. And in your handout it says that his family didn't do anything. Von Dartel, to my understanding, worked tirelessly to have Raoul released from Soviet custody.
Mr. Von Dartel came to the USA, he walked up the steps of the courthouse with me to file the lawsuit. But in 1999, pardon me, in 1989, when the Russians invited him and his sister for a ceremonial visit to Russia, I said, Guy, I've been working my heart out on this case pro bono. never took a dime. I said, don't go to that meeting without me or another lawyer, because they'll just give you some champagne and caviar and try to gloss things over.
Okay.
So, no, let me finish. You raised the issue. The family unfortunately ducked tail at the last minute, and Guy Van Darl didn't have enough strength to stand up against his uncles in the final analysis.
Okay, and in 1989, Senator Moynihan from New York introduced legislation to ask for the release of Raoul Wallenberg's prison records from the then Soviet Union becoming the Russians. And Congressman Mrazek was on the House side of that legislation, and the Soviets did release his prison records. And then the legislation was amended to ask for an impartial investigation, the Moynihan and Mrazek legislation in 1989, and there was an impartial investigation carried out by Swedish, US, and Russia, and no evidence emerged to support the claim that Raoul Wallenberg survived in prison. And Senator D'Amato...
with all deference, frankly, I and the rest of the people have heard your interesting point. I went to Senator Moynihan. I got him to do that. And may I say, yes, I did. I worked for Robert Kennedy and then John Sherman Cooper in the U.S. Senate. I was the one who instigated that. Jan Eliasson, the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, a Swede, said that that investigation was closed much too early. Let's move on to another person. It's enough.
Okay, well, Congressman Mrazek introduced it on my behalf.
I appreciate your good intentions.
I have a couple questions. I appreciate the work that you've done, and I think we all do. But I'd like to get, you said there were some high-ranking officials who are still in the government, and I'd like you to name a few names. A lot of us probably will buy your book, but give us a little bit more information and let us know who some of these people were.
With all deference, as I made clear before, it's a very exciting story. You can go to Kindle, Amazon.com, and bring it up, and that's for you to do. And when you do, I'll be glad to discuss it further. My name's right there on the website.
And the second question that I have is part of the flyer said that there was a $39 million settlement.
No, there was a $39 million verdict, which I won. But that verdict, as you'll again discover in my book, somehow through a form of our U.S. government scandal, was set aside, even though it was final and the 60-day period had run. You got to read the book. Sorry.
I don't understand what kind of a threat Wallenberg was to the Russians that they wouldn't release him.
I can answer the question. Wallenberg, near the end of the war, was trying to make a deal with the Germans for saving Jewish lives. He was trying to get trucks for lives, okay? The Russians, being a very suspicious people at the time, Stalin and such, were watching what he was doing. He was doing it for the benefit of mankind. He was trying to save some additional lives. He was negotiating, just as he would negotiate at the train stations with the Arrow Cross and give them some money. Let's get these Jews off the train, etc. So he was doing humane negotiation. The Russians observed that, and they said in a very cynical moment, which you can probably appreciate, we can hardly believe that a Swedish Christian gentleman would come all the way to